On the morning of his wedding, billionaire Carlos Thompson stood in the parking lot of the Grand View Hotel, staring at a black waitress he had never seen before. She gripped his arm with trembling hands and whispered words that made no sense.
"If you want to know who you're really marrying, hide in the trunk. Right now."
Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss stories like this one. Now let's get back to Carlos and find out what that waitress knew. Carlos Thompson had not always been a billionaire. 55 years ago, he came into this world in a cramped Baltimore apartment where the radiator never worked, and dinner was often whatever his mother could salvage from her employer's kitchen. His father disappeared when Carlos was 4, leaving behind nothing but a worn Bible and a mountain of debt. His mother, Lorraine, spent the next 2 decades cleaning houses for wealthy white families, pressing their shirts and polishing silver she would never own. But Lorraine Thompson had a saying she repeated to her son every night before bed. "Carlos' poverty is a circumstance, not a destiny. You remember that." He remembered. He remembered it through every scholarship application, every rejection letter, every door slammed in his face because of the color of his skin. He remembered it when he started his first investment firm with $3,000 borrowed from a church congregation that believed in him. And he remembered it when Forbes finally put his face on their cover, calling him the architect of dreams, with a net worth of $2.3 billion. Now at 55, Carlos Thompson was about to marry the woman who had shown him that love could exist without conditions, without price tags, without the constant suspicion that haunted every relationship since his first wife walked out when he was still struggling. Amada Palmer had entered his life 2 years ago at an art gallery in Manhattan. She was studying a painting he had just purchased for $600,000, and when he approached her, she did not recognize him. She did not know about the private jets or the penthouse or the charitable foundation bearing his name. She simply turned to him and said, "The brushwork is technically impressive, but it lacks soul. Don't you think?" No one had spoken to Carlos that way in years. Not his executives, not his advisors, not the politicians who came begging for donations. Everyone wanted something from him. But Amada, with her quiet confidence and her degree in architecture, seemed to want nothing at all.
"I fell in love with you because of who you are,"
she told him on the night he proposed, tears streaming down her face. "Not what you have." Those words had healed something broken inside Carlos. Something that had been broken since his first wife, Diana, looked at their empty bank account and said she could not do this anymore. Amada was different. Amada was real. Or so he believed. The wedding at the Grand View Hotel was the event of the season. 500 guests. Coverage from every major news network. A guest list that read like a who's who of American power and influence. The ceremony would begin at 2 in the afternoon, followed by a reception that would cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But Carlos Thompson did not know any of this when he arrived at 7 that morning. He only knew that in a few hours, he would finally have the family he had always dreamed of. Candace Williams had worked at the Grand View Hotel for 15 years. She knew every corner of the building, every secret passage, every room where powerful people conducted business they did not want others to see. At 42, she had become invisible in the way that service workers often do. Guests looked through her, not at her. They spoke freely in her presence, assuming she was too insignificant to matter. Most of the time, Candace did not mind. The job paid well enough to keep her daughter Destiny in college, and after everything they had been through, that was enough. Her husband had died 8 years ago in a construction accident, leaving her to raise their girl alone. But Candace was strong. She had always been strong, except when it came to her brother Jerome. 5 years ago, Jerome Williams was a rising accountant with a bright future. He had a wife, a baby on the way, and dreams of opening his own firm. Then he met a woman who promised to invest in his business. She was charming, sophisticated, and completely fabricated. By the time Jerome discovered the truth, she had used his identity to launder nearly $2 million through accounts he did not know existed. The authorities did not believe him. Why would they? He was just another black man with financial crimes attached to his name. His wife left. His reputation was destroyed. And one November morning, Jerome walked into his garage, started his car, and never walked out again. Candace found him 3 hours later. That image never left her. She spent the next 5 years quietly researching, learning, understanding how these schemes worked. She could not bring Jerome back, but she swore that if she ever saw the same pattern again, she would not stay silent. She could not. On the night before Carlos Thompson's wedding, Candace was cleaning the VIP floor when she heard voices from behind a partially open door. She recognized the bride's voice immediately. Amada Palmer was speaking rapidly in what sounded like Mandarin, a language Candace knew fragments of because Jerome had studied it for business. After the signing, the joint account will be activated. Everything according to plan. Candace froze. Those words, that pattern. Her heart began to pound. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. Through the crack in the door, she watched a man slip into Amada's suite. He was tall, well-dressed, and definitely not Carlos Thompson. Amada greeted him with an embrace that was far too intimate for a woman about to marry another man.
2 years,
Amada said to him, switching to English.
I'm exhausted, David, but after tomorrow we'll have enough to disappear.
David. The name burned itself into Candace's memory. Later that night, as Candace emptied trash bins in the hallway, she noticed a folder that had fallen beneath a service cart. Inside were photographs of Carlos Thompson, detailed lists of his assets, and a complex diagram showing money flowing through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Candace's hands trembled. This was it. The same scheme, the same trap, a different victim. She thought of Jerome. She thought of the nephew who would never know his father. She thought of every night she had lain awake wondering if she could have done something, said something, been brave enough to speak when it mattered. Candace Williams had been silent once. She would not be silent again. But who would believe her? A black waitress accusing the fiancé of one of America's most powerful men. She needed Carlos Thompson himself to see the truth. And she had only one chance to make that happen. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Candace watched Carlos Thompson's limousine pull into the hotel parking lot. She had been waiting for 2 hours rehearsing what she would say, knowing that if she got this wrong, everything would be lost. She had also been watching Amada's silver Mercedes in Lot B. The bride had a habit of leaving her trunk unlocked, something Candace had noticed over the past week while observing her movements. It was a small detail, but it was all Candace needed. She intercepted Carlos before his security team could react.
Mr. Thompson, I know you have no reason to trust me.
Candace's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins.
But 5 years ago, my brother was destroyed by people exactly like the woman you're about to marry. I couldn't save him, but maybe I can save you.
Carlos stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Who are you? What do you want? Money. I don't want anything from you. Candace met his gaze without flinching. I just want you to know the truth before it's too late. Amada is leaving the hotel at 8 to prepare for the ceremony. Her car is parked in Lot B and she never locks the trunk. If you want to know who she really is, hide inside. See for yourself. Carlos shook his head, already turning away.
This is insane.
Security! Candace's voice cracked, and for a moment the professional mask fell away, revealing the raw grief beneath. My brother's name was Jerome. He trusted someone who was playing a role just like you're trusting Amada. I found his body in our mother's garage. I am begging you, please, just look. Something in her eyes made Carlos stop. It was not the desperation of a scammer or the calculation of someone seeking reward. It was the terrible, unshakable certainty of a woman who had already lost everything and had nothing left to gain by lying. He thought of his mother Lorraine, who had spent her life being dismissed by people who thought they knew better. He thought of every time he had been ignored, underestimated, written off because of where he came from.
And he thought of Amada. Perfect, beautiful Amada, who never wanted to talk about her past, who always had an excuse for why he could not meet her family, who deflected every deep question with a smile and a change of subject. 2 years. And what did he really know about her? Carlos Thompson looked at the waitress standing before him, a woman who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by approaching him. Then he looked at Amada's car parked alone in Lot B. He had built his empire on calculated risks, on trusting his instincts when the numbers did not add up. Right now, something was not adding up. "The trunk," he said quietly. "Show me." The trunk of Amada's Mercedes was not designed for a man of Carlos Thompson's stature. He folded himself into the cramped space, his $2,000 suit pressing against the rough carpet, his knees jammed against his chest. The emergency release glowed faintly in the darkness, a reminder that he could end this madness at any moment. But he did not reach for it. Candace had closed the trunk with a soft click, whispering that she would be waiting at the hotel when he returned. Now Carlos lay in complete darkness, listening to his own breathing, feeling like a fool. He was a billionaire. He commanded boardrooms. He had shaken hands with presidents. And here he was, hiding in a trunk, like a character in some cheap thriller, chasing the accusations of a waitress he had never met. At exactly 8:15, he heard footsteps approaching. The car door opened. Amada's perfume drifted into the trunk, that familiar scent of jasmine and vanilla that he had always found intoxicating. The engine hummed to life, and the car began to move. For the first few minutes, Carlos heard nothing but the sound of traffic and Amada humming softly to herself. He began to feel ridiculous. Perhaps Candace had been wrong. Perhaps this was all some elaborate misunderstanding, and he was about to ruin the most important day of his life because he had listened to a stranger. Then Amada's phone rang. "David, I'm on my way." Her voice was light, casual, nothing like the tender tone she used with Carlos. "Don't worry. After today, everything will be finalized. 2 years of this exhausting performance and we're finally at the finish line." Carlos stopped breathing. Amada laughed at something David said on the other end. "Manipulating him was easier than I expected, honestly. You just have to find their weakness. With Carlos, it was simple. He's been desperate for unconditional love his whole life. So I gave him exactly that illusion. Told him I didn't care about his wealth. He believed every word like a man dying of thirst believes in a mirage." Each word was a blade sliding between Carlos's ribs. The night he proposed flashed through his mind. Amada's tears, her trembling voice. The way she had looked at him like he was the only person in the world. All of it. Every moment. A performance. "The joint accounts will be activated the moment the marriage is official," Amada continued. "Then we transfer everything through the Cayman shell companies. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be in Panama with new identities. Sophie is excited. She keeps asking when Daddy is coming home." Sophie. Daddy. The words crashed into Carlos like a freight train. Amada had told him her family was dead. Parents killed in a car accident years ago. No siblings, no children. She said she wanted to start fresh with Carlos, to build a family together from nothing. But there was a child, a daughter named Sophie, and a father who was not Carlos. The car continued through streets Carlos could not see, carrying him deeper into a nightmare he never imagined possible. After 45 minutes, the Mercedes finally stopped. Carlos heard Amada exit the vehicle, her heels clicking against pavement. He waited until the sound faded completely before carefully releasing the trunk latch. He found himself in a residential area he did not recognize. Upscale townhouses lined a quiet street, their manicured lawns and luxury cars suggesting wealth that preferred privacy over display. Amada had disappeared into one of these homes, a 3-story brownstone with ivy climbing its walls. Carlos approached cautiously, his heart hammering against his chest. Through a ground-floor window, he saw her. Amada stood in the middle of a warmly decorated living room, but she was not alone. A man held her in an embrace that spoke of years of intimacy, not mere acquaintance. This was David, tall, handsome, with the confident posture of someone who had been running this game for a long time. And then Carlos saw the child. A little girl, perhaps 4 years old, came running from another room. She had Amada's eyes and David's smile, and she launched herself into Amada's arms with the pure joy of a daughter greeting her mother.
"Mommy, you came back."
Amada's face transformed completely. Gone was the cool, sophisticated mask she wore around Carlos. In its place was genuine warmth, real love, the kind of authentic emotion Carlos had believed she reserved only for him.
"Of course I came back, sweetheart."
Amada kissed the child's forehead.
"Mommy always comes back."
David wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a picture of domestic happiness that made Carlos physically ill. This was a family. A real family. And Carlos was nothing but a mark, a target, a means to an end. Through the window, Carlos could see documents spread across a dining table. He recognized his own face in photographs, his properties listed in neat columns, his charitable foundation's accounts highlighted in yellow. They had mapped out his entire life, every asset, every vulnerability. He also saw a list with other names, other photographs, other wealthy men who had presumably fallen victim to this same scheme before him. Carlos stumbled backward, his legs barely supporting his weight. The woman he loved did not exist. She had never existed. Amada Palmer was a character, a role played to perfection by someone whose real name and real life remained hidden from him entirely. 2 years. 2 years of dinners and conversations and quiet moments that Carlos had treasured as the happiest of his life. 2 years of believing he had finally found what his mother had always wanted for him. A partner, a family, a future. All of it was a lie. He made his way back to the hotel in a daze, taking a taxi and barely registering the driver's attempts at conversation. When he arrived, Candace was waiting in a service corridor just as she had promised. "You were right." Carlos's voice sounded foreign to his own ears, hollow and broken. "Everything you said. It's all true. She has another life, a husband, a daughter named Sophie. I was just a job to her." Candace guided him to a quiet corner away from the wedding preparations that continued throughout the hotel. Staff members rushed past, carrying flowers and champagne, unaware that the groom's world had just collapsed. "I'm sorry." Candace's voice was gentle but steady. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." Carlos laughed bitterly. 2 years? I thought I was building something real. How could I not see it? These people are professionals." Candace reached into her pocket and withdrew a small envelope. "They've been doing this for years. They study their targets. They learn exactly what you need to hear, what you're desperate to believe. Then they become that fantasy." She handed him the envelope. Inside were photographs she had taken the night before. David entering Amada's suite. The documents listing Carlos's assets. Evidence that corroborated everything he had just witnessed. "There's something else you need to know," Candace continued. "Your charitable foundation. They've been using it to move money. Donations come in legitimately, but somewhere in the accounting funds are being redirected through companies that don't exist. If this marriage goes through, you'll be legally tied to all of it. When the authorities eventually investigate, and they will, you'll be implicated." Carlos felt the floor shifting beneath his feet. This was not just about a broken heart. His reputation, his legacy, everything he had built from nothing could be destroyed. He could face criminal charges for financial crimes he never committed. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Carlos demanded. "Why come to me instead?" Candace's expression hardened with old pain. "Because I tried that once before. When Jerome was still alive, I begged the police to investigate. They looked at me like I was wasting their time. Just another black woman making wild accusations against sophisticated people. Nobody cared enough to look deeper." Her voice grew stronger. "I watched my brother lose everything because nobody believed him. But you have power. You have resources. If I had brought this to the police as just some hotel waitress, what do you think would have happened? Carlos understood. Of course he understood. He had spent his entire life fighting against a system that dismissed people who looked like him and Candace. The bitter irony was not lost on him. He had escaped poverty, built an empire, become untouchable. And yet here he was learning that the same forces that had nearly destroyed him decades ago had simply evolved into something more sophisticated. The wedding starts at 2 o'clock. Candace glanced at her watch. You have less than 4 hours to decide what you want to do. Son. Carlos sat alone in his suite, staring at the photograph of himself and Amada taken the night of their engagement. Her smile was radiant, her eyes filled with what he had believed was love. He had kept this photo on his nightstand for months, looking at it every morning as proof that his life had finally become complete. Now he saw only a mask. At noon, Amada knocked on his door. She entered in a silk robe, her makeup partially done, looking every bit the nervous bride preparing for the biggest moment of her life. Darling, I've been looking everywhere for you. She rushed to embrace him, and Carlos forced himself not to recoil. Where have you been all morning? I was starting to worry. Just needed some time to think. Carlos kept his voice neutral, his face carefully blank. Big day. Lots of emotions. Amada studied him with those beautiful eyes that had captured his heart so completely. For a moment, Carlos almost saw genuine concern there, almost believed that somewhere beneath the performance, some part of her cared for him. You're not having second thoughts, are you? She touched his cheek gently. After everything we've built together. Built together. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Of course not. Carlos managed a smile that felt like shattered glass. Just nerves. I'll be fine. Amada kissed him softly before leaving to continue her preparations. Carlos watched her go, the woman he had loved, the woman who had never existed. He thought about his options. He could cancel the wedding quietly, claim illness or family emergency, let Amada slip away with whatever she had already managed to steal, and simply count his losses. His reputation would remain intact. No scandal, no public humiliation. But then she would do this to someone else. Another lonely man desperate for love. Another victim who might not have a Candace Williams to warn him in time. And what about Jerome? What about all the people these predators had destroyed before Carlos? Did he not owe them something? Did he not owe himself the truth? Even if that truth came with a price? Carlos picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his personal attorney. The second was to a contact at the FBI. By 1 o'clock, a plan was in motion. The wedding would proceed as scheduled. Every camera would be rolling, every guest would be watching, every news outlet would be covering what they believed was the social event of the year. And then Carlos Thompson would reveal exactly who Amada Palmer really was. He met with Candace one final time in the service corridor. I need you to testify, Carlos told her. What you saw, what you heard, all of it. The FBI wants documentation, witnesses, everything we can give them to build a case. Candace did not hesitate. I've been waiting 5 years for this chance. I'll tell them everything. You understand what this means for you. Your job here is finished. Amada's people might try to intimidate you. Your life is going to become very complicated. Mr. Thompson, my life became complicated the day I lost Jerome. Candace's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I've spent every day since then preparing for a moment like this. I'm ready. Carlos looked at this woman who had risked everything to save a stranger. She had no wealth, no power, no influence. All she had was her integrity and her courage. And yet she had done what no one else in Carlos's life had managed to do. She had told him the truth. Thank you, he said quietly, for being brave when it mattered. Candace shook her head. Don't thank me yet. We still have to get through the next few hours. At 1:30, Carlos Thompson stood before a mirror in his groom's suite, adjusting a tie that cost more than Candace earned in a month. Outside, 500 guests were taking their seats. Cameras were being positioned. The string quartet was warming up. And somewhere in this hotel, Amada Palmer was putting the finishing touches on her disguise, preparing to complete a 2-year con that would have destroyed everything Carlos had built. She had targeted his deepest wound, the orphaned boy from Baltimore who had never felt truly loved, the divorced man whose first wife had left him because he was not successful enough, the billionaire surrounded by people who wanted his money, his connections, his power, but never simply wanted him. Amada had offered him the one thing he could not buy: unconditional love. And he had been so desperate to believe it was real that he ignored every warning sign, every inconsistency, every moment when the mask slipped just slightly. That desperation had nearly destroyed him. But Carlos Thompson had not escaped the projects of Baltimore by giving up when things got hard. He had not built a billion-dollar empire by letting others define his fate. And he would not let this woman reduce him to just another victim in her collection. At 1:45, Carlos left his suite and walked toward the grand ballroom where his wedding was about to begin. The trap was set. The grand ballroom of the Grandview Hotel had been transformed into a cathedral of white roses and golden light. 500 guests filled the chairs arranged in perfect rows, their designer outfits creating a sea of wealth and influence. Cameras from 6 different networks captured every angle, broadcasting the wedding of the year to millions of viewers across the country. Carlos Thompson stood at the altar, his expression calm, his hands steady at his sides. The minister smiled benevolently beside him, unaware that this ceremony would never reach its conclusion. At exactly 2 o'clock, the string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon. The massive doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, and Amada Palmer appeared in a gown of silk and lace that had cost more than most houses. She was radiant luminous, the picture of bridal perfection, as she glided down the aisle with measured grace. Carlos watched her approach, seeing her clearly for the first time. Every smile she offered the guests was calculated. Every tear glistening in her eye was manufactured. She was performing the role of her life, and she was magnificent at it. He almost admired her dedication. Amada reached the altar and took Carlos's hands in hers. Her fingers were warm, her grip confident. She looked up at him with an expression of pure adoration that would have fooled anyone who did not know the truth. "You look beautiful," Carlos said, and he meant it. She did look beautiful. The monster wearing the mask always did. The minister began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. He spoke of love and commitment, of 2 souls becoming one, of promises made before God and community. The words washed over Carlos like water over stone. When the moment finally arrived, the minister turned to Carlos with a gentle smile. "Carlos Thompson, do you take Amada Palmer to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Carlos looked at Amada, at the face he had kissed 1,000 times, at the eyes that had promised him a future built on love, at the woman who had never existed. "Before I answer that question," Carlos said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I have a question of my own for the bride." A ripple of confusion passed through the audience. Amada's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Carlos, darling, what are you doing?" Her voice remained steady, but her eyes had sharpened with sudden alertness. Carlos released her hands and took a step back. "I'd like to ask you about David, and about your daughter Sophie, and about the townhouse on Maple Street where your real family is waiting for you right now." The color drained from Amada's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. "Who has been filling your head with these lies? No one filled my head with anything." Carlos reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a photograph.
I was in the trunk of your car this morning, Amada. Or should I call you by your real name, Sandra? I heard every word of your phone call with David. I watched you embrace your husband and your daughter in the home you've been hiding for 2 years. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. Cameras swung wildly, trying to capture every moment. Amada's mask finally shattered completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. This is ridiculous. She turned to the guests, her voice rising with manufactured outrage. Someone has clearly manipulated my fiancé with false evidence. This is a misunderstanding that we can clear up privately. I don't think so. Carlos gestured toward the back of the ballroom where FBI agents had quietly positioned themselves at every exit. These gentlemen have some questions for you about money laundering, fraud, and a network of similar schemes targeting wealthy individuals across the country. Amada's eyes darted to the exits, measuring her options. For a moment, Carlos saw the real woman beneath all the masks. Not the loving fiancé, not the sophisticated architect. Just a predator, realizing the trap had closed around her. She ran. She made it exactly 15 feet before 2 agents intercepted her, their movements efficient and practiced. Across the ballroom, another commotion erupted as David, who had been sitting in the back row disguised as a guest, was also taken into custody. Amada screamed at Carlos as they led her away. You have no idea what you've done! You have no idea who you're dealing with! Carlos watched her go, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness where his love had once resided. The woman he had planned to spend his life with was being dragged out of their wedding in handcuffs, and all he could think about was how convincing her tears had been on the night he proposed. 3 months later, the full scope of the operation became clear. Amada's real name was Sandra Mitchell, and she had been running variations of this scheme for over a decade. David was her husband and partner, and together they had defrauded 12 wealthy men of a combined $47 million before targeting Carlos. The investigation into Carlos's charitable foundation confirmed that funds had been redirected through shell companies, but because the scheme was exposed before the marriage, Carlos was cleared of any wrongdoing. He cooperated fully with authorities, and his testimony helped build the case that would eventually put Sandra and David away for 25 years each. Candace Williams testified as well. She sat in that federal courtroom and told the story of her brother Jerome, of how a similar scheme had destroyed him, of how she had spent 5 years preparing for the moment when she could help stop it from happening to someone else. Her testimony was crucial in establishing the pattern of behavior that proved this was not an isolated incident. The media painted Carlos as a sympathetic figure, a successful man who had been deceived by professional criminals. But Carlos knew the truth was more complicated. He had not been deceived by superior acting alone. He had been deceived because he wanted to believe so badly that he ignored every warning sign. On a quiet afternoon in December, Carlos invited Candace to his office in downtown Manhattan. She arrived in the same practical clothes she always wore, looking distinctly out of place among the marble floors and original artwork. "I've been thinking about how to thank you," Carlos said, gesturing for her to sit. "I could give you money. I could buy you a house. I could set you up for life." Candace shook her head firmly. "I didn't do what I did for payment. I did it because it was right." "I know." Carlos smiled for the first time in months. "That's exactly why I wanted to ask you something else. I'm establishing a foundation in your brother's name. The Jerome Williams Foundation for Victims of Financial Fraud. Counseling, legal assistance, help rebuilding their lives. I want you to run it." Candace stared at him speechless. "You spent 5 years learning how these schemes work," Carlos continued. "You understand what victims go through in a way that no one else can. This foundation needs someone who cares about the people it serves, not someone looking to pad their resume. I can't think of anyone better qualified." "Mr. Thompson, I'm a hotel waitress. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You knew enough to save me when no one else saw what was happening. You knew enough to risk everything for a stranger because your conscience wouldn't let you stay silent. The rest we can figure out together."
Candace sat quietly for a long moment, her eyes glistening. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Jerome always wanted to help people. He became an accountant because he thought he could help families manage their money, build something for their children. He never got the chance to do any of that. Then help me give him that chance now, Carlos said. Let his name mean something. Let his loss matter. 1 year later, Candace Williams stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a congressional committee on financial fraud protection. Her daughter Destiny sat in the gallery beaming with pride at the mother who had gone from invisible hotel worker to nationally recognized advocate. Carlos Thompson watched from the back of the room. He had not remarried. He was not sure he ever would. The wound Amada had left behind was too deep, the trust she had shattered, too fundamental. But he had found something else in the wreckage of his failed wedding. Purpose beyond profit. Connection beyond transaction. Candace concluded her testimony with the words she had repeated to herself every day since Jerome's death. The people who commit these crimes count on their victims being invisible. They count on shame keeping us silent. They count on a system that dismisses the powerless and protects the powerful. But I am here to tell you that invisibility is not weakness. Sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the one nobody thinks to look at. After the hearing, Carlos and Candace walked together through the winter streets of the capital. You know, Carlos said, I spent my whole life believing that success meant accumulating power, money, influence, building something nobody could take away from me. Candace nodded, waiting for him to continue. But the morning of my wedding, I had all of that, and it meant nothing. The only thing that saved me was a woman with no power at all who simply refused to stay silent when she saw something wrong. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman, Candace said. The things she taught you about seeing people really seeing them. That's what made you listen to me when nobody else would have. Carlos smiled, thinking of Lorraine Thompson pressing other people's shirts in their Baltimore apartment, telling her son that poverty was a circumstance, not a destiny. She would have liked you, he said quietly. They walked in comfortable silence for a while longer, two people from different worlds who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Behind them, the sun was setting over the monuments and memorials of a nation built on impossible dreams. Ahead of them, the work continued. There were always more victims to help, more predators to expose, more invisible people waiting for someone to finally see them. And sometimes Carlos had learned the person who changes everything is the one standing quietly in the corner waiting for the courage to speak. This story reminds us that truth often comes from the most unexpected places. The people we overlook might be the ones who see us most clearly. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week we share stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Maybe next time it'll be a story about someone just like you. Until then, remember, your voice matters. Never be afraid to speak the truth.